Someone told you to stay positive. Probably this week, probably while you were describing something genuinely bad. The diagnosis, the layoff, the eviction notice, and they smiled and said, "Everything happens for a reason." Notice who usually says that. Almost never the person paying. Voltaire noticed too in 1759 and wrote Candide about it. And here is the counterintuitive part. He is not attacking hope. He is attacking a specific kind of cheerfulness, the kind that gets used as an argument, the kind that explains why the burning building is fine, actually, if you understand the system properly. Voltaire's target had a name, the doctrine that this is the best of all possible worlds, and his method was almost cruel. He takes a sweet, trusting young man, hands him a tutor who preaches that everything is for the best, and then drives both of them through 30 chapters of earthquake, war, ruin, and injustice, while the tutor keeps insisting, through every single disaster, that it is all for the best end. It is the funniest book ever written about suffering, and that is not an accident. Voltaire understood that you cannot refute a cheerful lie with an angry argument. You have to make it ridiculous. But the reason we still read it is the last page. After 30 chapters of proving that the universe does not owe you an explanation, Voltaire does not land on despair, and he does not land on hope. He lands on 6 words, a rule for what to do when the world is genuinely on fire and you personally cannot put it out. In the next 20 minutes, you will get that rule, the argument that earns it, and a test for telling real optimism from the kind that is being sold to you by somebody who is not paying for it. The man who wrote it was already the most famous writer in Europe, and the most dangerous. Voltaire was the pen name of François-Marie Arouet, born in Paris in 1694, a notary's son who preferred satire to law and was twice thrown into the Bastille for it. He was exiled to England, came back with a taste for religious tolerance and empirical science, made a fortune exploiting a badly designed state lottery, and spent 60 years using both his money and his sentences as weapons. And then, on the 1st of November 1755, the ground opened under Lisbon. An earthquake, a fire, and a great wave destroyed most of the city in a single morning. It was All Saints' Day, so the churches were full, and the churches came down on the people inside them. Tens of thousands died, and across Europe, comfortable men explained it. This was the age of philosophical optimism. Leibniz had argued that a perfect God, choosing among all the worlds he could have made, must have chosen the best of all possible worlds. Alexander Pope had compressed the whole system into a slogan every educated person could recite. Whatever is right. Voltaire had half believed it. Lisbon killed the belief. He wrote a furious poem asking what crime the crushed infants had committed, and was told he was spreading despair. 4 years later, with Europe now also tearing itself apart in the 7 Years' War, he answered his critics properly. Candide appeared in 1759, written at speed, published anonymously in several cities at once because it was certain to be banned. It was banned. It was burned. It sold like almost nothing had sold before, and Voltaire denied writing it for the rest of his life, which fooled absolutely nobody. Here is the whole book in one sentence. Candide is a comic demolition of the idea that the suffering in the world is secretly justified, and an argument that once you stop demanding it be justified, you are finally free to do the small amount of good actually within your reach. Notice what is not in that sentence: a plot. That is deliberate. I am not going to recap this book chapter by chapter, and nobody should. Candide is a picaresque, an avalanche of disasters deliberately built to be too many to hold in your head, one absurdity knocking into the next. Summarizing it beat by beat would be like summarizing a hailstorm. The story is not the subject. The story is the evidence. So we will take the argument instead, in 5 beats. First, the doctrine, how a comforting idea becomes impossible to argue with, and why that is a defect and not a strength. Second, the earthquake, what happens when the theory meets a real catastrophe, and who ends up paying to keep the theory alive. Third, the diagnosis, the moment the book stops joking and names optimism as a specific disease. Fourth, the man who never updates, Voltaire's portrait of a believer who keeps the belief long after the belief has died. And fifth, the garden, 6 words at the very end that turn the whole demolition into something you can use tomorrow morning. Keep one question running underneath all 5. When somebody tells you that everything is fine, or that it will all work out, or that it is happening for a reason, who is holding the bill? First beat, the doctrine. We meet Candide as a trusting young man in a German castle, and beside him his tutor, Pangloss. The name is a joke, from the Greek for all tongue, who is professor of metaphysico, theologico, cosmolo-nigology, a subject Voltaire invented so that it could not defend itself. Here is his teaching, word for word. "It is demonstrable," said he, "that things cannot be otherwise than as they are. For all being created for an end, all is necessarily for the best end." And then the proof. Observe that the nose has been formed to bear spectacles. Thus, we have spectacles. Legs are visibly designed for stockings, and we have stockings. Sit with that for a second, because the joke is doing real philosophy. Pangloss has quietly reversed cause and effect. Spectacles exist because we happen to have noses. He says, noses exist so that we could have spectacles. Every fact in the world becomes fresh evidence for the conclusion he already holds. And that is the actual target of this book. Not hope, not kindness, but a belief engineered so that nothing can ever count against it. Ask of any doctrine, what does it forbid? What would prove it false? Pangloss's doctrine forbids nothing. Earthquake, plague, betrayal, a war he cannot explain. All of it slots neatly in as necessary for the best end. And you have heard the modern versions all week. Everything happens for a reason. The universe has a plan for you. The market is never wrong. This is not a setback, it is an opportunity. Every one of those is a nose built for spectacles. So here is the line to carry out of beat 1. A belief that cannot be embarrassed by any possible evidence is not optimism. It is decoration. Second beat, the earthquake. Voltaire drops Lisbon straight into the novel. Candide and Pangloss arrive by sea, the ground shakes, the city comes down, and while people are still being pulled out of the rubble, Pangloss stands in the dust, reasoning aloud about why this particular disaster was necessary. Then Voltaire delivers the sentence that is the cold heart of the book. And do not laugh too fast, because it is real history dressed as farce. The sages of that country could think of no means more effectual to prevent utter ruin than to give the people a beautiful auto da fe. For it had been decided by the University of Coimbra that the burning of a few people alive by a slow fire and with great ceremony is an infallible secret to hinder the earth from quaking. Voltaire is not being surreal. Portugal really did answer the earthquake with a great public ceremony of religious punishment. Look at the machinery he is exposing. The theory said the world is well ordered. The earthquake said otherwise. So rather than revise the theory, the authorities staged an event to prove they were still in control. And the cost of that performance was charged to a handful of people picked out for the purpose. Candide, battered and bewildered, finally asks the only sane question in the book. If this is the best of possible worlds, what then are the others? Watch for the modern shape of this. Whenever an institution meets a failure it cannot explain and responds with a ceremony instead of a repair. A task force, a rebrand, a resignation offered up in place of a fix. You are watching the University of Coimbra at work. The line to carry. When a comforting belief starts costing other people, it has stopped being a belief. It has become a policy. Third beat, the diagnosis. 2/3 of the way through the book, the jokes stop for one page. In Suriname, Candide meets a man by the roadside who has been maimed by the sugar operation he was enslaved to work in. One injury from the mill, one for having tried to escape. Voltaire will not let you look away, and he will not linger either. The man explains his own condition in a single flat sentence. This is the price at which you eat sugar in Europe. Then he adds that the Dutch preachers who converted him teach every Sunday that we are all children of Adam, blacks as well as whites, so that if these preachers tell truth, we are all second cousins, which he thinks makes the arrangement worse rather than better. And it is here, not in the earthquake, that Candide finally breaks. He says he must at last renounce his tutor's optimism, and his companion Cacambo, who has been hearing that word for 2,000 miles, asks the question the whole book has been building toward. What is this optimism? And Candide answers, it is the madness of maintaining that everything is right when it is wrong. That is the definition, and notice how narrow it is. Not hope, not resilience, not the decision to keep going anyway. Optimism, in Voltaire's precise sense, is the insistence that the wrongness is not wrong. And that insistence is almost always spoken by somebody standing at a comfortable distance from the damage. The sugar tasted fine in Europe. It always does. The line to carry, cheerfulness about a cost you are not paying, is not a philosophy. It is an accounting error. Fourth beat, the man who never updates. By the last chapter, Pangloss has been hanged, cut open by a surgeon, beaten and sold to the galleys. He has lost an eye and an ear. He has, by any standard anyone would accept, been personally refuted. And here is Voltaire's quietest and most devastating sentence. Pangloss owned that he had always suffered horribly, but as he had once asserted that everything went wonderfully well, he asserted it still, though he no longer believed it. Read that twice. He is not fooled anymore, he is just committed. The belief has stopped being a claim about the world and turned into a piece of clothing he cannot take off. So here is Voltaire's test, and it works on anyone, including you. Ask what would have to happen for you to change your mind. If the honest answer is nothing, you do not have a belief, you have a costume. This is the most modern thing in a book nearly 270 years old. We rarely keep our positions because the evidence is good. We keep them because dropping them would mean admitting what we defended while we held them, and who we told to cheer up, and how long we were wrong out loud in front of people we know. Pangloss cannot stop, because stopping would mean that all the suffering he so elegantly explained away was never explained at all. the line to carry. The last thing a dead belief loses is its owner. Fifth beat, the garden. The survivors wash up on a small farm outside Constantinople, safe, together, and completely miserable. Bored, bickering, still arguing about metaphysics while the vegetables go untended. Then Candide meets an old Turkish farmer who has never heard of the political catastrophes that have shaped his century and does not care to. Candide, expecting a rich man, remarks on his estate, and the old man says, "I have only 20 acres. I and my children cultivate them. Our labor preserves us from 3 great evils: weariness, vice, and want." That is the hinge of the whole book. The old man is not ignorant of the world, he is simply not auditing it. Back at the farm, Candide says it for the first time, that whatever else is true, they must cultivate their garden. And Pangloss immediately tries to absorb it into the system, pointing out that man was put into the Garden of Eden to dress and to keep it, so that even honest work is more evidence for the doctrine. And Martin, the pessimist, the book's other wrong answer, refuses to be pulled into one more debate. "Let us work," said Martin, without disputing. "It is the only way to render life tolerable." So the little society goes out and works the plot. And then Pangloss starts up one final time, chaining together every catastrophe in the novel to prove it was all necessary for them to be sitting there eating candied citrons and pistachio nuts. And Candide answers him and closes the book with 6 words. "All that is very well," answered Candide, "but let us cultivate our garden." Notice what that actually is. It is the dichotomy of control, arrived at by comedy instead of stoic argument. 2 categories: the enormous machinery of the world, which you cannot move and cannot even reliably explain, and the small plot you can physically reach. Optimism spends its entire life in the first category, issuing verdicts on a system it does not control. Voltaire says, "Stop auditing the universe, work the plot." And this is not retreat, because look at the final page. Every person in that little society becomes useful according to their different abilities, and the land produces. The line to carry: you were never asked to justify the world. You were asked to tend something. So, what does all of it add up to? Strip away the shipwrecks and the duels and the absurd coincidences, and Candide is one continuous argument, and every beat is a step in it. Pangloss teaches a doctrine that nothing could ever contradict, which is precisely what makes it useless. Lisbon shows what happens when reality contradicts it anyway. The doctrine is not revised, it is defended, and the defense is paid for by whoever is nearest and weakest. Suriname gives the thing its name, the madness of maintaining that everything is right when it is wrong, and shows that the people doing the maintaining are reliably the people not being harmed. The last chapter shows the endgame, a man still reciting a creed he no longer believes because he cannot afford to have been wrong. And then the farm outside Constantinople offers the alternative, and the alternative is not pessimism. Martin, who insists that everything is terrible, is just as stuck as Pangloss. He also has a theory that swallows every piece of evidence, and it leaves him just as useless. Voltaire refuses both men. He is not telling you the world is good, and he is not telling you it is bad. He is telling you that the verdict on the world is not yours to deliver, and that treating it as yours is exactly what keeps you sitting in a room arguing while the ground goes untilled. That is the whole book. Not a shrug and not a retreat. A reallocation of attention, away from the universe which does not need your ruling, and toward 20 acres, which need your hands. Here is the one thing to carry out of this book and into your week. Find your 20 acres and be honest about where the fence is. Take the thing that has been eating you, the political catastrophe, the industry collapsing, the situation you have narrated to 3 different friends this month, and split it into 2 columns. On one side, the part you can actually touch this week, a call you can make, a person you can feed, a skill you can practice for an hour, a room you can fix. On the other side, everything else. Then do something in the first column today, before you have finished forming your opinion about the second. And carry the other half of Voltaire too, because he is not letting you off the hook for cheerfulness. Sometime this week, you will hear yourself, or someone near you, explain why something bad is secretly fine. When it happens, ask one question. Who pays for this being fine? If the answer is you, it may genuinely be courage, and you should go ahead. If the answer is somebody else, somebody who is not in the room, who did not get a vote, then what you are listening to is not optimism. It is a bill being quietly forwarded. That is the whole test, and it works on the person telling you to stay positive, and on the days when the person telling you is you. Voltaire watched a city fall on the people praying inside it, listened to Europe explain why that had been necessary, and answered with the funniest book ever written about suffering. A demolition of the idea that the damage is secretly justified, landing on 6 words that are less a philosophy than an instruction. But let us cultivate our garden, not surrender, a reallocation. And he meant it literally. He spent his last 20 years on an estate at Ferney, planting, building, running a watch factory, sheltering refugees, and fighting the individual injustices he could actually reach. If this walk through Candide gave you something worth keeping, subscribe. A new classic every week, faithfully, in about 20 minutes. Next time we leave Enlightenment Europe for a battlefield in ancient India, where a warrior sits down in his chariot and refuses to fight, and a god spends 18 chapters telling him why he must act anyway without owning the results. The Bhagavad Gita, the other great answer to the exact question this book just asked. And tell me in the comments, what are your 20 acres, the one thing genuinely within your reach that you have been neglecting while arguing about all the things that are not? I read every reply.